I know. I am completely certain. We hear these words all the time. We use those words all the time, especially at a place like this, a college, university campus, where you come expecting certainty. You expect truth, access to knowledge. It's part of who we are, how we talk, what we do as human beings. Today, though, I'd like to think about this idea of knowing and knowledge in a slightly different way. How knowledge is a feeling rather than a certainty. I like to use the idea of déjà vu as a place to start to think about this. Most of us have experienced déjà vu, this feeling that you know, that you've been somewhere before, that this has happened already. But at the same time, you know that that can't be the case, right? You haven't experienced this. So you have this paradox. I know, and they're both mixed up. Knowing is a complicated feeling, and it's a paradox of being human. This is what I think is an important thing for us to talk about today. What does it mean to not know? I first came upon this topic as an item of intellectual curiosity when I did an experiment called the invisible gorilla. Some of you may have seen this. It's a pretty popular thing on the internet, but I'll tell you about it in case you don't know. In this video, it's an experiment that you do, and you watch two teams passing a basketball. One team is in white shirts, and the other team is in black shirts. Your task is to count the number of times that the white-shirted team passes to each other. But there are basketballs everywhere. It's complicated. It's really, really a difficult task. And I'm kind of competitive, so I embraced this task. I wanted the answer. I wanted to do it right, so I was watching really closely. Count. And as it's going on, I'm like, okay, I think I've got it. And at the end of the task, the answer comes up, 16, I got it, I was right. Graduate school was not wasted. Great, I was thrilled. But my elation lasted for about 10 seconds because the next thing that came up on the screen was this question. Did you see the gorilla? Gorilla, no, there was no gorilla. This is a joke, right? This can't be true. But they continued and they showed there was a rewinding process that showed a gorilla, this fantastic thing walking through the screen while I was busy counting basketballs. It wasn't subtle. The gorilla strolled, pounded its chest, and I missed the whole thing. I was so sure there wasn't a gorilla, but it was there. I actually thought it was a trick, so I went back to the original URL, clicked on it, and watched the whole experiment from the beginning, and couldn't believe there was a gorilla there. So much for graduate school, right? It's like, are you kidding? I missed a gorilla, a fantastic, huge, a human dressed up as a gorilla, but it was a beast that I just missed. And this made me really unsettled. First of all, it's like, wait a second, how could I miss a gorilla, and how could I not know that there was a gorilla there? And that made me, though, in addition to being unsettled, I became curious. What else don't I know? What else am I missing? How am I certain and wrong? And what does this mean? So I did some more research in other effective graduate school. I decided to study this. And I learned, for instance, that the invisible gorilla is something that psychologists have been studying for a while, and it's got a name, inattentional bias. You pay attention to the things that you're looking at, but you miss what's in between. So inattentional bias is one example of how we don't know, how we sometimes can't know. It's what our brain does to us in our quest for knowledge and for understanding the world. We have to focus. A second example is memory. In memory, we also have a lot of fallibility and also malleability. Our memories trick us. There's a really good example of this, again, from psychological studies that shows that we can be biased in how we remember things based on how people talk to us. So in one experiment, just one example, there are many, but one example was when an experimental group told people who had seen a car crash, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? That was one group. And the other group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? the difference between hit and smashed was 5 to 10 miles an hour. So it's a meaningful difference just based on the words that are suggested to you. And then furthermore, people noticed that there was glass, broken glass at the scene. There wasn't. But when the word smashed was used, they saw it. It was in their memory. And so they had this experience that was changed. It was malleable based on how they were communicated with. It has relevance for things like eyewitness testimony. So that's a second example. There's a third example of how we don't know and how we often can't know, and that is the way in which our minds look for patterns. They look for stories in things that we see. This is a really useful thing for human beings, say, when they're growing up and trying to acquire language, something that all of us do. Our brains, when we're children, need to create order out of these chaotic sounds that we're hearing coming out of people's mouths. And when that happens, we're able to create language and develop our communication skills. Our brains create certainty, a sort of story with information as it's coming in. But this gets tricky in other categories. For instance, another example, epidemiology, studies of disease and the rates of disease as they spread across territories. In the United States, for instance, if we look at cancer rates, you can see that they're spread pretty evenly across the country. But in that, there are clusters, little focal points where there are more incidences of cancer. And our brains look at this and we say, why? Why is there more cancer here and not here? And we're looking for explanations. Our brains are creating a story, a sense of certainty that explains what's going on with cancer. So we look for environmental causes, we look at ethnic diversity, the ways in which people eat, all kinds of possibilities that might explain this. Overlooking often one of the most likely explanations, which is the nature of random numbers. That distribution is exactly what you would expect according to the laws of randomness. In fact, it would be really strange if there weren't clusters. That's how interesting this phenomena is. But our brains, looking for certainty, do something else and create explanations that are often wrong. So with these three examples, there's many more, but I wanted to give you the flavor of how we don't know. It makes me think of one of my favorite bumper stickers, which is, just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning author, says it a little more elegantly when he talks about the puzzling limitation in the human brain, which is to be more sure of things that it can't actually be sure of at all. And it also makes me think of one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite movies, The Princess Bride. Okay, you know what I'm going to say then, but I got to say it anyway. In The Princess Bride, Vizzini, who's involved in this extraordinary kidnapping caper, keeps using the word inconceivable. But every time he uses it, just what he says happens, so that finally his sidekick comes along and says, "You keep on using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means." And that's exactly how I feel about knowing. We keep using the word knowing, but it doesn't mean what we think it means. I'm a historian, and in my historical work, I study Puritan sexuality. Don't be too nervous. I don't think about what goes on in their bedrooms so much, thank goodness, as the way that they use their ideas about sexuality to organize the way they saw the world. What we're doing when we do this as historians is we're creating an argument, all right? And that's what our brains often do. So what? Why does this matter? What is interesting about not knowing? Well, for me, one of the conclusions that I've come to is that I feel like a better person when I embrace this sense of not knowing. I don't have to be competitive. I don't have to judge. I don't have to have truth all the time. Often, in fact, truth isn't available. My brain is creating certainty that I want to question every now and then. I want to think critically about. And so there's a freedom to be a better person. And here's a few examples of what I mean. I feel like I can be more compassionate. When I look at somebody and I think, that person seems kind of unhealthy, they can lose weight. And then I'm like, well, wait a second. I don't know that. I don't know that person's life circumstance. Or one can consider the idea of the idea of our social and political structure, right? We think that someone can get a job, but we don't know what back injury that person might have, what sort of circumstances are preventing them from doing this, so we can have a more human-friendly social and political system. And even in education, rather than saying, I know you can sit down and listen to this, we don't know a person's condition that might interfere with their ability to be educated in a very traditional way. So not knowing, for me, is a kind of freedom. And I wanted to share that with you today. This not knowing creates freedom to see the fantastic, see the gorilla, or maybe it's a zebra. Instead of staying focused on your competition, on your sense of judgment, on the ways in which we are taught to know, even at a place like this, we can instead be free. And in that freedom, I think that we can be better people. Thank you.